Penitent One, thou hast given yourself the vow of silence. Thou art the sole survivor of the Brotherhood. Thou opposed his holiness, and thus thou and thou's order were massacred. Thou art to seeketh his holiness Escribar, cleanse Custodia, of the miracle's will with the mea culpa, with the holy wounds of attrition, contrition, compunction, and abnegation. Thou shall surface the three true puppeteers, exploiting the people's guilt and desire for penance. Go, expunge the miracle, and all who stand in the way, Penitent One. Purge this world of the high wills. Exemplaris, Excomunicationis. A word of caution before I begin that this video showcases heavily on areas within the game and shows multiple boss encounters within. Custodia is a land heavily influenced by Catholicism and southern Spain. This metroidvania single-player game released in 2019 and was developed by the Spanish team of The Game Kitchen and published by Team 17. You rise as the Penitent One, our silent protagonist, the remaining survivor of the Brotherhood of the Silent Sorrow, by the grace of the miracle. The hallowed force of the miracle manifests itself not only beneficial circumstances, but most often cruel ways, shaping the inhabitants into twisted beasts. Upon resurrection, you're thrown into a boss battle who serves as the tutorial and warden of the area. If you cannot defeat this guy, you will have no hope in continuing on with the game. Soon after, you'll encounter the narrator of the story, Deogracias, who tells you of the Cradle of Affliction, a sacred relic which will be your pilgrimage. Deogracias also adds a thorn into your sword, which infuses and can grow larger during the game with certain actions which will influence the ending. This thorn feeds off the Penitent One's guilt. Along the way, you must seek out the three humiliations in order to be deemed worthy to enter the Cathedral of His Holiness Escribar, his final destination. Escribar had turned his back on the miracle, and in time it had transformed him. His throne now sat on a mountain of ash and countless inhabitants, attempting to climb and ultimately be swallowed by the ash, twisting them into the monsters we see. The game also includes 3 free DLC which expanded the game world, including a third true ending, various challenges, new bosses, items, and quests. Custodia is a large interconnected world, even more so in the expansions. Like any interconnected game, exploration is essential for progression and finding key items, quest items, upgrades, and collectibles. Every tile of the map also factors into the overall completion percentage, very similar to Castlevania Symphony of the Night as an example. In case you haven't seen my video for that, definitely give it a view. Thank you. From the ruined town of Albero, which acts as the main hub of the game due to its interconnectivity to multiple zones, we will be introduced to the wastelands, mountains, snowy peaks, underground sewers and regions, prison, the inside of castles and cathedrals, and the spectral realms. The game is typically divided into 2. Before the bridge, collecting the 3 humiliations, and after the bridge, collecting the 4 masks. Between these 2 parts, you will be backtracking from time to time as you have gained new relics, which grant new powers, some of which allow you to traverse to areas you could not venture to previously. There are several intricate puzzles dotted around the map where relying on the environment is the key to your success. Some of these are extremely cryptic, and usually those are the ones which are very much optional. Speaking to the dead sometimes can offer tips to these. The game world is sprawling, but just enough which you can run from one end to the other within minutes. But thankfully, fast travel becomes available with Castlevania style teleporter rooms. As you progress, and even donating to the church can unlock further fast travel opportunity. The problem and frustration this game has is the amount of collectibles which you will need to scour the map very carefully to find and to remember where they are, and when you get the relics to allow access to these. A lot of my time towards the end of my first playthrough was dedicated to this back and forth. Gameplay rewards the player by paying attention to enemy attacks, as these can be avoided, blocked or parried. The parry system works very similar to games such as Dark Souls, where using your block at the correct time will give you the chance to perform a counterattack to the opponent and potentially stun them and cause an execution, which is a very violent end to the opponent. Note that if the attack is too strong though, then a counterattack will not be possible. Trial and error is really the only way you'll know this. The good news is that all attacks and abilities I'll mention are upgradable at mea culpa altars scattered throughout the game world. Not only are these altars used to upgrade your abilities at hefty costs, but they are also the only way to permanently enhance your sword strength outside of some collectibles. One balance one will need to consider during progression is if you want to spend your vital tears of atonement, which is your currency, on ability upgrades, healing flasks and enhancing their effect, or buying items. Charging your blade for a powerful blow is something I rarely found myself doing, as you must wait for the charge up and I found myself always wanting to move. This game has various combo attacks, with the easiest combo involving hitting the attack button multiple times in a row for a devastating flurry. Plunging attacks from the air is generally only done to get the first hit on an enemy in a surprise attack, as I found myself rarely able to do these in combat. Lunge is a dodge attack which has a wide area of effect and something I used extremely often, as it can open enemies to a stun. Finally, using your fervor, essentially your mana points of the game, you can throw a bloody projectile for decent damage, so you can add some range attacks to your arsenal. These can be used to obtain out of reach collectibles throughout your pilgrimage as well. These general abilities will be at your beck and call and needed to tackle every enemy you come across and the dozen or so bosses this game throws at you. There are a good variety of enemies, however I feel very few of them feel very impactful. All of these enemies require watching their animations to react to as many of their attacks as possible, which can range from physical assaults to magical barrages. I'll get to the bosses in the next section, so I want to touch once again on this game's collectibles and deeper inner workings. Along the way, you will be introduced to numerous collectibles to enhance your gameplay and adding further to the deep religious themes the game has. Over time, you will collect rosary beads, which will act very similar to other memorable metroidvania games such as Hollow Knight's Charms feature or even Ori Will of the Wisps' Spirit Shards feature. Inserting these beads into your expanding rosary rope will grant you various gameplay boosts, from stat increases to resistances to changes in gameplay. I usually have one set for general exploration and regaining health and mana throughout, and another for bosses, with variations depending on what the boss demands. To expand your health, you will need to find 6 sorrows. To expand fervor, you will need to find 6 baptismal fonts. To have more health flasks, or bile flasks as the game calls them, you will need to find empty flasks and then fill them with blood at certain fountains. These flasks can be further upgraded, so their use is enhanced further by sacrificing a previous flask to empower the previous. All these involve exploration and tears, and I don't mean the tears you weep from dying in this game, but the currency. On top of these, there are magical abilities called prayers, which consume fervor, most of which damage opponents in different ways. My favourite makes you temporarily invincible. I love you, Tiento of the Torrent Hairs. This prayer in particular can cheese mechanics, granting more time to pummel bosses. Mea Culpa Hearts offer a range of passive, offensive and defensive effects to aid you in battle on your sword. Finally, there's 2 more collectibles for very lengthy side quests, which will add hours of additional gameplay onto your game. Bone collectibles for the Ossuary side quest, which can give you a lot of currency as you progress it, and open an optional boss needed for the true ending. And the second one being the Moonlight Babies, as I like to call them, which are needed for a particular painting, and a pain in the ass to get at the same time. One highlight to many Metroidvania style games or even difficult Souls-like games are the bosses, those sometimes brutal challenges which test your skill. Bosses in Blasphemous are no different, typically a test of everything you have learned to this point, and generally build on quite well from each other in progression. But that does not mean that the difficulty curve is perfect either, as some of the bosses I killed on my first go, whereas others I have had several attempts. But like any good game, the more practice and attention you give to their attacks, the better you will become. The good news is that the game usually hides rosary beads somewhere in the area to negate some of the damage that the area's boss may do. For example, before the boss battle, Corsi, If you are clever enough in the prison and explore properly, you can get a nice fire-resistant rosary bead to smooth out the damage in the battle, which there is a lot of. There will be many game over screens, or as you will see, Exemplaris Excomunicationis, which essentially means you have been made an example of and excommunicated. Game over in this game thankfully does not have that many drawbacks. The main drawback is that you are locked out of a portion of your favour. However, you can collect your corpse where you died and regain favour. Every time you die, you grow in guilt, which can be cleansed in certain areas of the game, but it's better to save your currency and get your corpse, or beat a boss and have it all regained. I did not often die to regular enemies. It was usually from environmental hazards such as spike traps, which will always kill you if you fall onto them, or if you fall off the map, which can be prevented with a relic. Out of all the boss battles, most died in a single attempt, or within 2 or 3. Some died within a few more attempts of this. However, I did struggle with only 2 bosses in the game on my first playthrough. One was a mandatory boss, and I typically only died due to I couldn't figure out how to avoid the gigantic beam it continued to chain in the final phase of the fight, but once I did, it was all over for that boss. Most boss encounters will be a few minutes in duration, so it's best to just survive, and as we would say in Dark Souls, get good. But generally, they are an enjoyable affair. The other boss, which was an entirely optional boss, which is involved in the collection of skeletal fragments of people spread throughout the game. Arguably, it is the hardest in a regular run of the game, and the fact it realistically is only needed to be fought on New Game Plus means you should realistically only fight it for the challenge, but it is really not needed in general completion. This boss requires constant watch of the ground for fire, proper timing of blocking in our onslaught of abilities, and especially charge abilities, and just knowing when to safely attack her. Like most bosses, she increases in difficulty around 50% into the fight, bringing another flurry to her abilities, constantly needing to dodge fireballs and more chaos in general. But she is not my favourite boss. The Snake boss would hold that title. This boss is found at the end of a new zone added in the first expansion. Similar to the boss I just mentioned before, both are involved in the true ending, but not needed to be killed on a first playthrough. But at the time I did not know this, as I only used a guide for this game when it came to the final collectibles, when I was around 95% through the game. The boss continuously loops its attacks, so once you know which attack is coming, you can plan easily ahead, as it's forgiving in this respect. As the fight goes on, the boss will raise higher into the air to signal the start of a new phase, which will enhance each of its abilities, but the general handling remains the same for both. The key to this is to know when you can get a few hits in and when you should focus on dodging. You will get there by the time you are patient, so slow and steady, and this encounter will come to an end. There are many more bosses added into the new Game Plus feature, which requires you to complete the game one time previously, and also its very own boss rush feature, which tests you through various sets of bosses until you reach the ultimate challenge, akin to Hollow Knight's Pantheon feature, but on a much lesser scale. The final challenge has you face 16 bosses back to back, which is nearly every boss in the game. Within the game, there are optional areas added through DLC, which feature a lot of new items to collect, but also bosses and side quests. Although I already briefly touched on the new bosses and boss rush feature, there are also some other cool content added as well. The first is a hidden arcade game where you play as an 8-bit Penitent One for the cost of 2,500 tiers ago. The object of the 8-bit adventure is to find 5 hidden skulls throughout the levels and defeat the 8-bit boss. It's a fun little side adventure through a castle which offers a character skin to change your appearance as you play. During the game, you can interact with Miriam from the Bloodstained series in the DLC of Challenge Zones. Note, these are not required for main game progress. These are grueling, timed platformer sections, possibly to address calls for more platforming challenges in the game. There are 5 of these challenge rooms in total, each hidden around the world of Custodia. Some of these maps you will have only seconds to spare, but I found for longer trials I usually had a lot more time spare by the end, because you'll spend a lot of time waiting for platforms to move into the right locations for you to maneuver. The goal for each challenge is to reach the final room housing a mirror shard within the allotted time. The game will constantly be trying to kill you during the trial, typically with spike traps or some hazards. It requires a keen eye and observation with moving between platforms and dodging. If you die, and you will die, you immediately respawn at the entrance and you can attempt the challenge again without penalty. And uncovering all 5 mirror shards for Miriam will complete her daunting side quest and offer a new prayer. And there we have it, an overview look at Blasphemous. This game has some truly disturbing imagery, but anyone who follows religious paintings will see some ideas the game puts forth for you. The endings are very different than each other, and you can feel like your adventure was all for nothing or worthy depending on how you progress by the time the end comes. With the amount of collectibles in the game and the additional optional content, the game is highly replayable, and with the true ending it offers the twist that we needed. Even the vast majority of achievements are quite easily achieved with enough exploration. This is a true addition and contender into the metroidvania genre, and it will be interesting how the eventual sequel can build from here, as there is so much more this game can do. Thank you for watching my Blasphemous Unicorns, and remember to please subscribe for more content in the future. And with that said, I give this game...
I'm not to blame. It is the gypsy girl, the witch who set this flame.
out of 10.